So thinking about that kind of model, right, where you can understand why Black individuals in the States and in Canada would be hesitant, right, to go for healthcare because of all these things, that applies to financial institutions too. And that comes to money trauma, right?
Action, y'all. Welcome to the show. Welcome back, Jefferson. How are you?
You know what? I'm pretty good today. Considering all things considered, I'm pretty good today. Thank you for asking. How are you, Evolve?
I'm good. I'm looking forward to today's conversation, and I did my meditation and prayer. So when I'm on that kind of jam, I'm always going to be good.
Love it. As you can see, we have our very first guest ever on our podcast today. I hope I'm not butchering your name. It's Anna-Liza Badaloo.
You're pretty close. Anna-Liza Badaloo. Not bad.
Badaloo.
Yes, when I was in grade 1, the children had a great time calling me Anna-Liza Goodaloo. So I take either one.
I love that they were calling you good, and you really are bad.
Right? I like to think I have elements of both, as we all do, but, we'll see what sides you'll see today in this chat.
Yeah. So for our audience, Anna-Liza and myself are both based in Canada. And as you know, Evolve's based in the United States. And this is an interesting topic. Today, we're going to talk about money, trauma, and generational wealth. One of the reasons why we came up with this, I had met Anna-Liza through a mutual contact of ours in the financial services space. I was talking about a very interesting way, a gentleman by the name of King Qween, let's give him a shout out. He has a very interesting way of looking at more non-profit funding and development, whole other discussion. But he and I were chatting and he said, oh, you need to meet Anna-Liza. I was like, okay. So I met with Anna-Liza and mind blown. She had pointed something out for me that I had been going through. I'm a gentleman of a certain age. And my parents had passed away, and I recently came into not a huge amount of money, but a little bit of generational wealth, shall we say. Just a small, modest inheritance. And I used that to put into my home and purchase a 2-bedroom versus a 1-bedroom condo, basically. And I'll be honest, I was feeling really guilty about this because I was doing, from my perspective, I was doing quite well. I mean, I'm in my middle-aged, obviously. And what was interesting is I felt really guilty about all of this. And what was interesting is a good friend of mine, one of my best friends, South Asian, Kenneth, said to me, Jefferson, you have nothing to feel guilty about. This is about generational wealth. Like, I don't have any children. I have a lovely niece, and he's like, that's who you're building this for. That's what this is about. You have nothing to feel guilty about. White people have been doing this for generations. This is what's going on. And Anna-Liza and I were having a chat, and Anna-Liza brought up this concept of generational wealth and money trauma, especially with melanated peoples. Evolve and I were having a chat about that. And Evolve, I'll let you share your perspective.
Yeah, I thought when you brought it up, Jefferson, one, what I really love about the relationships that you have with people is like, it seems like in Canada, people are just very easeful to connect folks with each other. And often you'll bring friends into our conversations. And I'm often very jealous because I never get to meet them. I just get to hear all the cool stories. But I really resonated with your conversation because my mother passed when I was 21 years old. And, I got money during that time and family treated me differently. It was a whole lot of money. It was maybe $30,000 or $40,000. At that time, maybe it was a lot because I was 21. But in hindsight, my mother's been gone nearly 16, 17 years. That's a lot of wealth to leave the family. And she was the breadwinner, right? So sometimes when I think about who can I call on for support, she's not there. So in hindsight, it wasn't a lot, but I felt that guilt very similar to you. And I thought about bringing in my friend, K. Kenneth Davis, and shouts out to him if he's watching this episode. But I'm happy that it's just the three of us to really be able to talk about this. Unfortunately, Kenneth couldn't make it. Maybe we can talk to him again. He mainly focuses on financial literacy for the LGBT community, but I don't even think this is about literacy. I think this is about thriver's guilt and really not feeling aligned with some of the wealth that comes in because you've been told that money is bad. And maybe we'll get more into that conversation today, but it was really great when you brought in Anna-Liza, because I was like, this will be a great way for us to have the conversation with someone who explores it on a more regular basis. But also, I just think that we all come from all of these unique backgrounds. So us bringing our experience into the space is going to be really powerful.
Thank you. So Anna-Liza, did you want to continue? And help us to understand this topic?
Absolutely. I'd like to present a different perspective because we're talking about generational wealth, which, as you say, there's so much in there, right? There's so much about, for those of us, such as myself, being the first generation born in Canada, my parents being from Trinidad and Tobago, boy, there's that pressure, right? From those, whether it's our parents or grandparents, whoever those individuals were, that made that very difficult journey from wherever they were coming from to Canada, to the United States. And then they have us, right? Now, we don't know any different, right? We've been born here, even if we visited our homeland. But from birth, right? And often, speaking from a South Asian perspective, oftentimes your parents let you know. You don't have to ask. It's very clear how much work they did for you. And whether they say it this way or not, it can very much be received as pressure. Damn, look what they did for me. Now here I am. What am I going to do to live up to those expectations? And a lot of that is money, right? Yeah. A lot of that is status. But when we think about, what our immigrant parents wanted for us, a lot of the times it's money. For example, when I first started to go and work for nonprofits, my parents weren't having any of that. They came here for me to profit, right? Really overtly. And they were like, what's going on here? When I started working in the environmental sector and advocating for racialized people to be more engaged, for example, in things like going camping and doing outdoor activities, something I didn't grow up doing either, my parents, like many other, were like, how are you going to ask me about going to a trip to sleep on the ground? This is why I came here. So you didn't have to sleep on the ground. So all of these things come into, I think, that guilt, that you were talking about. But I also was thinking about the opposite of generational wealth. I'm going to call this generational debt. And my experience is a little bit different from y'all. So my dad passed away several years ago. He didn't leave me any wealth. He left me generational debt. He had a lot of debt that I was then responsible for. And it was a very bad situation because, it's already fairly traumatic, yes? Having a parent pass away. And then you're dealing with all of this, and you're dealing with creditors' calls and all of this kind of stuff. And my own finances were affected. And my mother is in a very different situation, When she passes away, I believe I will be in receipt of generational wealth. But whatever you're getting from this, I think ultimately the question that it comes down to, and you were mentioning this, Jefferson, do we feel like we deserve the money that we get when we actually get it? Evolve, what are you thinking about that question? That do we deserve it? Because when, the rubber hits the road and you're there and you're about to pay your bills or you're about to allocate your funds, that's when it really matters. What do you think, Evolve?
I think the method of deserving is a feeling. It's emotion, right? Like, and when it comes up in my body, when I think about do I deserve, is no. Instantly, when you said that, I was like, I don't know if I necessarily deserve it, because I always attach deserving money to earning, not to receiving it as a gift. And that is something that I'm still working through now. So I don't know if you all may have listened to it, and I was going to bring this joke in because, we've been battling all year, or at least the place I was born, Los Angeles, and Drake, due to the rap battle between Kendrick and Drake. But there's a song on Kendrick's album, and you may have not listened to it because you're loyal, and I understand that because I haven't really listened to Drake's music this year. But on the album, the song is called Man in the Garden, but he repeatedly says, I deserve. And I listen to that every morning almost as a mantra, and he's talking about like deserving equity. He's talking about deserving for his mother to live a good life, deserving for his kids to live a full life. And I really resonate with that medicine because often I do feel that I don't deserve. And I've received so many gifts of abundance that show up in money, but also show up in wisdom. I was able to be with my 100-year-old grandmother's sister. So my 100-year-old great aunt this weekend in Andalusia, Alabama. And I was like, I get to experience the history of my family in this type of way. Like, what type of blessing and gift is this? But still in that moment, I'm thinking like, do I even deserve to be here? I got cousins in LA who are older than me. Should they be here? Should I not? So I consciously don't sometimes feel that I deserve. And I think that that shows up in money trauma and hoarding and scarcity. And I'm doing the healing, right? Listening to Kendrick, doing my prayer and meditation so that when the gifts do come, not only do I know I deserve, but I'm a really good steward of the abundance that I receive. What about you, Jefferson?
That whole concept of guilt, I guess. I mean, something, Anna-Liza, you had said in terms of your parents coming to Canada. For me, it was my grandparents who came to Canada with my dad was a young child. And I know he struggled. I know they struggled. I mean, we don't need to get into all the stories. I'm sure you've heard many of them yourselves. Being like the only Black folk on their street when they moved to those who are local. I'm based in Toronto, and they bought a house finally up at Yonge and Lawrence. And at that time, Yonge and Lawrence, for those who are local, it was a dirt road. Like Yonge Street was a dirt road. The streetcar, not subway, stopped at Eglinton. They were on the outskirts of town. Today, that is prime real estate. But I just heard of
Did they buy the land or they bought the house itself?
I bought the house and the house and the land. But the point of the story that I'm making is when I hit my 20s and I went off to school, I went to the University of Waterloo. I used to go to Ottawa to celebrate Canada Day. There were many opportunities afforded to me in this country that I'm thankful for and grateful for. And I remember my grandmother would sit me down and she'd have her tea and she'd say, Jefferson, tell me about your school. Tell me about your schooling. What are you learning? What's happening? Tell me about your trip to Ottawa. And then she'd smile and she goes, I know it was hard for your father and for his brothers and sisters coming to this new country, this cold country from Bermuda. This is why we came, though, because I'm loving hearing these stories of all these opportunities you were afforded that I know my family would not have been privy to in Bermuda. I mean, they were, let's be realistic, my dad's family was a bit well off in Bermuda compared to my mother's family. And I know that wasn't a resentment with my father in terms of they could have been members of parliament, all of that in Bermuda. But my grandmother was very much, that's why we came to this place. And we realized it wasn't that generation, it was your generation, the next generation and beyond. And I'm seeing my niece, little shout out to her. She just won Western Canada, an engineering competition. And she's actually heading off to Halifax soon to represent Western Canada in the Nationals. But I'm seeing it in this next generation, myself included, and then others. So just to go back to what you were saying, Evolve, around this concept of gratitude and gratefulness, I'll be really honest, that's something I haven't always practiced in the past. And I'm starting to practice that a bit more now. That was one of my New Year's resolutions for 2025 is every day, think of something or just state something that you're grateful for. And on air right now, one thing I'm grateful for today is my relationships. And I'm thinking of you, Evolve, and you, Anna-Liza, as well as a new relationship and just these relationships that I'm cultivating. And to go back to the exact topic of money trauma, shall we say, or generational trauma through money and through finances, I think of my niece, frankly. And I remember when we were putting the wills together for my parents and there were questions around that. And she was very young at the time. And I was like, Kiana, I don't have any kids. You're getting it all at the end of the day. You are going to be fine. Financially, you're going to be fine. And that's why we're doing this. And that's why we put all of this in place, because we are thinking of that next generation. At least now we are. Now, that said, I haven't had a discussion with her about this. But I'm just curious again, Anna-Liza, I would like you to continue on with some of the issues and challenges, perspectives that we were discussing when we had our meeting about a month ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that story. It really is about that next generation, and something that I, being also, a person of a certain age, as I get older, I find that it's so easy for us to judge the generation above us, right? Why didn't you advocate for this when such and such, let's say politically or historically, was going on? And why didn't you do this? And why did you force me to do this? Or why did you put so much pressure on me for this? Well, as you get older, you understand that a little bit better, right? And then because as you get older, you're looking at that next generation. I mean, honestly, when I see brown folks and South Asian folks that are of myself being on the young side of Gen X, when I look at millennials and people of a younger age than that, they express themselves in ways, they do things that I could never have dreamed of doing. And part of that comes with money. They have a much freer attitude, to make some generalizations here, over money than I ever did or than I ever was encouraged to do. And I know for myself, my mom, and I know that part of the issue with some people with money trauma is that they were simply never taught growing up, right? How do you actually, how do you actually manage money, right? And if you don't have a lot of money to begin with, you can kind of understand why you never learned to manage it. If there's nothing to manage, right? So it kind of makes sense. And I know that my mom, her thing was, you have to be independent and not rely on a man. That was her main thing based on her experience. Thank you for the snaps. I'm going to share that with my mom. She will appreciate that. And I think she did the job too well, to be honest with you, because she really instilled that in me like hardcore. So that means that she did provide me with some financial tools. But again, that emotional stuff gets in the way, right? You can know how to do something, but if you ultimately don't feel you deserve it, or if there's other things in there with the pressure, it really kind of messes it up. One thing I wanted to share was this concept of the fact that this money trauma, it never really leaves you. And I want to talk about it from a neurological perspective, if I may. So perhaps we've all had this experience. You're sitting there, you're trying to pay some bills, you're asking yourself questions that some people have never asked in their lives, like, how am I going to move this money around? How am I going to get this paid? And so on. And when you're engaging in those discussions, that's when the money trauma really comes up, because if you have a poverty mentality and you're not used to having money, when you get it, you might not do good things with it, right? Because you've known maybe from birth that I have this money. And then you start to think, when am I going to have money again? And the actual logical answer to that question, it doesn't matter. You could be getting more money the next day. The point is that there's this insecurity in your mind, right? That you're feeling. I'm not sure when I'm going to get it. Therefore, the money that I have, I better do all the things with the money. And then that can end up being a self-sabotage situation, because you can't do all the things, right? With the money when you get it. So there's a few things in there. But going back to that neurological aspect, there is something where when we're growing up, if we grow up in an environment, and remember, children are like little sponges, right? It's not so much what you tell them, but they observe, and they observe a heck of a lot more than we think that they do. By talking about this, I want to share an example of a television commercial that's playing here in Canada that I think will illustrate this. A little bit of context for yourself, Evolve, and our American friends. So yes, we have a public healthcare system in Canada. Traditionally, though, it has not included dental care. I always thought that was such a false dichotomy, because your teeth are all right up in your body, right? In the start of your body. So I digress. With that, in recent times, the federal government has decided to offer a dental care benefit based on income. Individually or family, if you make under a certain amount, you're eligible. To promote this program, the government decided to put out some television ads. And I want to describe this one to you because I saw this the other day and this thing just stopped me in my tracks, and I'm so happy I just have a chance to speak about it today. So here's what happens in the commercial. Essentially, there is a Black female who's sitting. She's very busy. She's sitting at a laptop. You see girls busy, whatever she's up to. Then, as she's in the midst of this, a young man, presumably her son, comes up super casually, like too casually, actually. He asks her, "So, Mom, what does a cavity feel like?" So she's doing her thing. She's kind of half listening, and she's like, it feels different for different people. And he just kind of looks at her and is like, okay. And he's out. He leaves the room immediately. And then a couple seconds later, you see the wheels turning in her head. And she was like, wait a second. And she's asking him, like, why are you asking? Why are you asking? And he's like, no reason. He's out. He's running out of the room. And then you see even more wheels turning, right? Because now she's going into a panic, right? And she's thinking about, oh no, he might have a cavity. How much is a dental care going to cost? Oh, right, I heard about that new benefit. Then, of course, there she is back on her laptop, right? Looking up this benefit.
Mom, what does a cavity feel like?
I think it's different for everyone.
Wait, why?
No reason.
Why?
The Canadian Dental Care Plan is here. Those with a family income under $90,000 and no dental insurance may be eligible. Applications are now open for kids under 18. A message from the Government of Canada.
So I saw this thing and I thought, well, goodness gracious. When you grow up like that as a child, and I had this experience, you see very early there's certain things family can't afford. And therefore, you don't ask. Now, does it mean that you don't still want those things? Or that you maybe even still don't need those things? That doesn't go away. What you do, though, is you can come up with a bunch of strategies to pretend, to tell yourself, no, I don't actually need this. No, I don't actually want this, because it's a coping mechanism, right? So that's the thing that in a way never leaves you. And when you get to adulthood and perhaps you're not in that situation anymore. Maybe you're not financially insecure at all, as as we're talking about, but that's still in there, right? And this has such big impacts. So let me leave it there and just take it to the room here. Jefferson, what is your response to this, either just hearing the description or having seen the commercial?
Well, I've definitely seen the commercial. Thank you for sharing that. And what was going through my mind when you were talking about the description, I thought of, frankly, my parents or my dad, then my mom, and I'm slightly different topic, but I find in ACB, African, Caribbean, and Black communities, men specifically aren't really attuned to our health. We don't talk about it, mental health, physical health. We don't talk about it with each other, et cetera, et cetera. And to your point, Anna-Liza, my dad did not go to dentists, didn't believe in dentists, all of that. My mother was a school teacher. It was drilled into me, frankly, from birth. Education is the key to success and thriving, period. Also your health, including your mental health, dental health, physical health, all of that. And I just remember, in terms of going back to specifically around the dentist, my dad, I remember there were times where frankly, as a grown, excuse my language, as a grown-ass man, he had a cavity. And he walked around in pain. Well, I don't need to go to a dentist. I can handle that. I can suck it up, buttercup, and all that stuff. And part of it was that machismo attitude. And I remember my mother's like, I have dental benefits at my job for the family. Use them. Take advantage of them. I understand in the past, growing up, we didn't have that. I have them now. And Elisa was exactly what you were talking about in terms of that mentality, because that's the mentality he grew up with. For not having those dental benefits. But my mother was a teacher. She had amazing benefits that extended to the entire family. Related, but little fact, I still go to the exact same dentist I went to when I was a kid. Admittedly, he's not the exact same dentist. Let me rephrase that, dentist office. My niece goes to that office now too. Other dentists have purchased that practice. But again, I mean, I was very fortunate. For me, that was a privilege, and, fortunate that my mother had great dental coverage because of her job as a teacher. So that's what I was thinking. And, you're very right. Because I remember my dad's attitude was very different towards it because he didn't have the coverage. He was an entrepreneur and worked for himself and didn't have a lot of that coverage. Whereas his wife, his partner in this case, had that coverage and he still wouldn't use it. And she's like, use it. I have the coverage. Please use it. Stop walking around in pain. Anyhow, that's what was going through my mind.
You're making me, Jefferson, think I need to call my dad when we get off here, because he has a cavity right now that he hasn't dealt with. I don't get it. But I do get it, right? Because
it's
men, but also the history of, especially, here in the US, Black men and healthcare, right? Like, being experimented on, not treated well, going into the office and them treating them like their children. Oftentimes my dad I feel that he really connects to his independence, right? So when he goes into a place where someone might be more machismo than him, then he doesn't even want to enter those type of venues. But when you brought up this amazing commercial, and y'all just have some really good media, I can't wait to visit y'all and just watch TV, because that's some of the things that I like to do. But when you brought up that commercial, I was thinking it cuts through so many intersectional layers when we're talking about money. One, it's right, the idea of, can we even afford this? And you learning that as a young person, what you can afford and what you can't afford. and what privileges you have access to. So there's things that growing up, I used to think that's only for rich people, right? That's only for wealthy people. And I remember, for example, I was at wine tasting with some friends and they invited us out. I had never been wine tasting. I was like, okay, this is some bougie things. Like we get picked up by a van and we go drink and we just are taken care of. This is interesting. So we get to the table and there's like a receipt there for about $500 or $600. And I seen the receipt and I said, glad that's not me. Turns out the people who had brought me, it was theirs. Right? So I was kind of judging like, I would never spend that much on wine. And they were like, well, actually, we did. 2 years later, I'm at the winery spending the same amount. Because it was that good, right? But what I learned from that experience was like, don't limit yourself. And it is a possibility, right? Because they were a young Black couple. My wife and I were with them. And I was like, if they can afford this, I can afford this as well. So some of the things that have opened up for me as an adult have been able to see possibility models when it comes to money, because I did grow up in an environment where we didn't have as much access to money, but we had access to love, y'all. And sometimes I'll have conversations with people who are a little bit more wealthy than I, but they didn't grow up with their grandmother living in the same apartment, their great aunt living right up the street, right? Like they didn't have that type of abundance. So I do appreciate and know that I deserve that. And sometimes I think that that's a lot more tangible than even some of the money concepts that some of my peers learned. But that commercial is just so great because I think more Black folks after seeing that are going to go to the dentist. So shouts out to Canada for supporting folks. But I also think it'll get people's wheels to turning about how they talk about money and finance with their children, so that maybe they don't take on some of those, not even negative behaviors, but scarcity behaviors that we have.
That's such a good point, Evolve. And, you're making me think about essentially what our institutional experiences are, right? Particularly as racialized people. You were pointing to health equity issues just now, right? Speaking about the fact that, hey, if you're a Black individual and you live in Canada also, mind you, I don't want to give us a pass whatsoever, but just as you mentioned specifically some of the history in the United States, yeah, there has been abuses that you've mentioned and continues to be abuses. So oftentimes I feel like people that are, for example, white and European people that may not have had those experiences, they still have a lot of trust in that medical system because it has been good to them, right? So they trust it, of course. And that means it makes it quite difficult for them to understand when other people do not trust. So, for example, if either of you had shared with some other individuals what you just shared about your parents and the dental situation, I imagine there's some people out there that might say, well, what's the problem? Like, you got the coverage, just go already. What is it? If you didn't have the coverage, I could see. They don't understand, right? Because they've never had this experience. So thinking about that kind of model, right, where you can understand why Black individuals in the States and in Canada would be hesitant, right, to go for healthcare because of all these things, that applies to financial institutions too. And that comes to money trauma, right? My previous partner, who is also of a melanated nature, but also Indigenous, we had a very, very bad experience with the bank. In fact, applying for a loan that was quite racially motivated. The fact that we were a queer couple, that also was not helping, I believe, because we're not legally married. And there's a lot of things that, and I include myself, I have had bad experiences with the financial system. I have a lot of mistrust, right? So when
you're not alone.
No,
you're not alone there, Anna-Liza.
You're not alone.
Yeah.
There's a lot, right? And people need to remember this because when it comes to money trauma, look, in Canada, for example, here, unlike the States, we really just have about 5 major big banks, right? They really have quite the monopoly in all kinds of ways. And that does have equity implications because there's less banks for you to go to. If you go to one bank and you find you're being treated inequitably, there's just not that many to go to. So that's a point I wanted to bring, that all of our experiences, which are different for all of us, right, based on our race, our ethnicity, our disability status, like all of these, our gender identity, all of these things, it's not that certain people just have money trauma. Like, we all have it because we're in capitalism. So there's that. The only difference to me is like, how is that money trauma being experienced? So, for example, when y'all talked about folks that, perhaps have grown up with generational wealth, I don't care what race or ethnicity they are. they also don't have a lot of financial management skills because for the opposite reason, they also have never had to learn, right? Have you ever met somebody who has grown up wealthy and never had to worry about where that next meal, that next mortgage payment, that next anything is coming from? And then later in life, perhaps circumstances hit them and they end up being in a lesser financial situation. Those folks are lost, right? They've never had the skills. So yeah, it's really just taking this holistic view, right? Everybody is impacted by money trauma. The question is, how are we impacted by it? And what are we going to do with that information? And also, if we have privilege, which we all do, how are we going to do good things with that privilege and address money trauma, right? Are we going to take the knowledge that we have and perhaps go to our peers and say, hey, this like forbidden topic about money, let's get it on the table. Do you need some support? How are things going for you? Are your finances sustainable? There's all kinds of ways, right, that we can help raise each other up here. Evolve, anything coming to mind for you coming out of this?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for just normalizing, right, the money trauma experience. And I think that was refreshing for me to hear. Like, even if people grew up with money, like they still have an experience when it comes to money trauma. It's just in an opposite way. And I grew up with not knowing we didn't have a lot. And I know it's a lot of people that live in that experience. I had no idea that we were as broke as we were because we had each other. I had a slew of cousins and aunts and uncles. But I do always say that I know how to hustle. Like, I know how to make money. And I also know how to make things out of nothing. So I know how to make a really good ham and cheese. I can make a fried bologna sandwich, right? Like, if we got a little bit of something, I'm going to make it tasty. But I think the healing side of it, which is what you're talking about, like, how do we heal our communities, is actually bringing money up into the conversation. So what I've tried to do with like my cousins and people that are my age is like talk about it. So I was talking to my cousin the other day and she was like, I really want to pivot. She's working as a crosswalk person at elementary school because her daughters go there. So she's like, I could drop them off at school and then I could do the crosswalk job, right? And it's easy, especially LA, like getting around and gas is so expensive. She's like, one stop, I go to work, they go to school. But she's like, I want something more once they transition and they start to take the bus that I can have. So we started to explore different careers. And I was like, well, how much would you want to make? And I was like, this is a conversation that she's my older cousin that we've never really had before around the transparency about how much she makes and how much I make, right? And I was like, this feels so healing for us to be able to have the conversation. So I think it's talking about it when it gets uncomfortable, which happens with some of my elders, like my dad, because he's about to retire. And I'm like, Dad, can I look at your retirement accounts? Can we talk about what you're investing in? Can we have some strategies about the time? He shows me one thing at a time, y'all. Literally every Thanksgiving, he's like, I got this thing I want you to see. And I have to take it slow with him and be patient, right? So I think we almost have to be anti-capitalistic when it comes to this, because capitalism is like, show me everything, be really loud. But many of our communities need that slow and steady pace. And it's really going into every conversation individually and being really to support the person, but also really have a foundation of consent. If they don't want to talk about it, then it's cool. And if they do, then, being willing to listen is what I've been trying to do.
It's interesting you say that in terms of your relationship with your father evolve. I had a similar relationship with my father, and then my father passed away about just over 10 years ago now. He had a brain tumor, quite frankly, and it was literally the size of a grown man's fist. In his left hemisphere. But to go back to and bring it all back to this concept of generational wealth and money trauma, we tried to have that discussion with him prior to any of this. When we went to go see the surgeon and we were having a chat about surgeon, incredible human being. And he said, look, you are a very healthy man, Mr. Darrell. He was in his 70s at the time. He's like, you have the body of a 50-year-old man. Like, you're very healthy. I am literally going to be cutting your skull open and going in to remove this tumor from your brain. I do these surgeries 2 or 3 a week. Like, I'm very skilled at this. I do not anticipate. These are things that could go wrong, but heaven forbid something goes wrong. You need to make sure your affairs are in order. And Evolve, to go back to your point, that was when we finally had the talk in terms of, and he shared all the information. We sat down with the financial planner, full disclosure for anyone listening and thinking it is a good idea, talk about it with your financial people first. But what our financial planner did, which really helped, I'd say us, my sister and I in particular, when it came down to that whole concept of generational wealth, and in this case, our modest inheritances. In a nutshell, basically, I became co with my dad for all of his finances. My sister became co with my mom for all of her finances. And we were both executors on each other's wills. And I mean, because my father went first, I had the easier job. I basically just signed everything over to my mom. And it was just very easy. And then again, looking back there, I was put on half of my mom's. My sister was this is all getting into tax. And Annalise, I'm sure you know all this stuff already, but it's getting into tax stuff, and talk to a financial professional before you do all of this. But again, when it came to, I can't speak for the States, in Canada, we are taxed quite heavily. But when it came to taxes, it really helped with that from a generational wealth lens as well. Like the government didn't come and say, oh, well, we're going to take our 50% and leave you with what have you. So that's one of the ways we settled. But to your point, Evolve, unfortunately, it really took my dad having a brain tumor and to have literally brain surgery before we could have this discussion around just finances and what's going on. That's what it took, because he didn't even have a will up until that point at all. And I remember he used to joke about it, but his joke was, I want it to be a sad day for everybody when I die. And just even though we had all our ducks in a row for both our parents, it was still a lot of work just to go through. My mother passed away about 3 years ago now, and I'm not joking. We just wrapped everything up this year. No, just the end of last year. That was 3 years, and that was with our ducks in a row. Admittedly, there were issues with COVID and whatnot that slowed things down in terms of probate for the house. But point of the story is, if we didn't have our ducks in a row, we'd still probably be dealing with all of this, frankly, financial mess. So, I mean, I'm glad we're having this discussion. I hope people are taking something away from this.
I'm taking it in my notes, Jefferson. I'm going to use that story to force my dad to talk more. I'll be like, let me tell you about my friend Jefferson, what happened to his dad. We should not wait until this moment, because I'm the only child. So that's one of the pressures that I often think about, is like, everything's on me. So when my mom passed, it was like, I don't want that to be the same experience when my father passes away. When I have a little bit more of a plan. So thank you for giving me the courage to talk to him, and also a story. And I have a beautiful Black man's face. I could say, this is Jefferson, so that he can see himself in you. And this is going to help me. I'll report back after we make our plan.
I'm going to be sharing this as well. I can literally think of 3 friends of mine right now, all racialized people, who are going through this, or more accurately, attempting to go through this, because they've really been coming up against a brick wall, talking to their parents about this stuff, right? And it's gotten to the point where the conversations I have with them around this now, it's like strategy sessions, It's like, okay, last time I talked to them, I tried this, I evaluated my strategy, and now I can revise it, and now I'm going to go round 2 again and see how we do. And that's how intense this is. And, one thing that's occurring to me as we're talking about the holisticness of money trauma, right? And the fact that it affects all of us. A common thread I'm hearing in this conversation is that we need to talk more about money. And therefore, if we daylight, right, that concept, and we really raise that up, the trauma will lessen, right? It's like any trauma at all. It gains power when it remains hidden, right? There is power in that, and a dark power, might I add, not a good one. And the more that you raise it up and you bring light to that, and you bring visibility to that, then the more the trauma recedes, and you can actually just start to have a real convo about it. And something I'm thinking is that in the way that money trauma affects everyone, I think that we need to start talking about money in all aspects of life, in all relationships. Because so far we've talked about a couple of things. We're like, well, we need to talk about it with our family, right? We need to talk about it, whatever the relationship is, with our racialized peers, right? In terms of uplifting our community. I know recently I have sort of taken it as a personal experiment. Now, I always have talked about money, like with my friends, but never really dollar amounts. And recently, I just decided, you know what, I'm going to start to do this. And what I would do is I might be asking their opinion about something and say, okay, my situation is this. I'm thinking of doing this. I'd like your advice. Now, if I'm going to ask for someone's advice on something, to be respectful, I've got to give them certain pieces of information if I want them to give me a reasonable piece of advice. Else, what am I doing, right? I'm wasting everybody's time. So I started now by prefacing statements really gently like, well, I know we don't normally talk dollars and cents, but da-da-da, and I'll just lay it out. And what I have found, that was real hard, mind you, at the beginning. I really had to work myself up to that. It felt real vulnerable to literally be talking dollars and cents, But the more that I did it, the better it felt. Because we don't even realize like what a weight it is on us that we don't talk about this. And when you start to talk about it, it can be very freeing. And better still, in my experience, the more that I've talked about it, that encourages other people. You can model good behavior. And other people are like, oh, damn, she literally talked dollars and cents. Huh, that wasn't that bad. I don't think any less of her. Actually, maybe I think more of her now. And if they can take that mentality into the rest of their lives, and then one person tries to have another conversation, and then one person tries to have another conversation, I think this is why we're really going to get somewhere, Evolve, what do you think?
I hope to be like you one day and be comfortable enough to talk the dollars and cents. I'm definitely working on that. I think one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about lately is how we use electronics so much for money that we don't have to talk about dollars and cents. And I think it's dumbing down some of our young people, right? I was at Macy's recently, and that's a department store here in the United States. And there were some young people outside, and they were looking for an Uber to take them to the movies. And they were like, can we pay you to take us? And I was like, it is 10 of y'all, and I'm in a Camry. I don't know how this is going to work. I can't even fit. The math is not mathing. So the kids are looking on there. I'm like, just order a larger car. And they're like, well, the Uber Blacks are expensive. I'm like, what about the comfort? It's a van. And then it hit them. And then they started doing the math. And I could tell that they were a little lost. I said, it's going to probably be an extra $1.50 for all of you if you decide to get the comfort, right? And I helped them to kind of do the math. And I was like, it's difficult to showcase math on a computer compared to when it's actually in your hand. So one of the things I think that we can bring back is actual cash, right? Like even when we bring cash to when we go to dinner, instead of just bringing your card, instead of us all just swiping, let's bring the cash and actually get more into the act of counting. And that's how I plan on bringing up the dollars and cents. I think that could be a fun activity for people to bring it in and for us to actually count the money out and for it to be a little bit more tangible. But the other thing that you were mentioning, earlier around the guilt, I think is that lack of literacy, but it's also a shame in admitting when you don't have, right? So one of the things that my family is really big on is somebody's going to try to get the check and then we consider them the big baller. So if I go out with my older cousins, they're going to try to pay for my food before I even know that they've paid for it. Like, it's like almost like this thing that they do, right, to show gratitude. But now that I'm sitting with it, I'm like, some of y'all got like 4 or 5 kids. Like, how are you really able to still keep this going? But no one wants to say when they don't have enough, right? So I think also being willing to say, I don't have the money to go to dinner tonight, or I don't have the money to go to lunch, and not being willing to like overspend is another way where we can heal some of that relationship to capitalism.
That's I love that perspective. It's funny, just was thinking, I'll be blunt, I'm going to a birthday dinner tomorrow night with a friend in Canada. Typically, like, let's say it's your birthday, Evolve, you'll invite a bunch of friends to dinner and, well, we'll pay for ourselves and we'll all pay for a portion for yours. It's my understanding there are some other cultures where the birthday person pays for all their friends and invites them. I think
what's culture in that? I've never seen any part of that one.
I think it's Filipino culture, but I could be mistaken. I'm hoping one of you can do a quick little Google search to make sure. But point of the story, just to go back to this concept of money trauma and whatnot, when you think about that, that makes more sense. Because I remember we were doing this for a friend, and they were like, well, wait a minute. The birthday person's not paying. We're paying for it. So you're telling me that if all of these 20-something people here, I got to come to 20 different dinners and pay for 21 versus just paying for one dinner? What makes more financial sense? And we're all like, yeah, you're right. It makes more financial sense to just pay for the one dinner. And then they went on to say, plus you can limit it to what you can afford. as in I don't have enough to pay for 20 people. So I'm inviting my 3 best friends and I'm going to a restaurant that I know I can afford for 4 people. And then I do it once a year. And then, my 3 best friends, they might want to invite me to their birthday dinner, but I know I'm doing this once a year versus randomly throughout a number of different birthdays. Is that's a great example of how these things can manifest. I remember years ago, I went to one with a friend of mine, a mutual friend, but 3 other friends. Kenneth was there again. And there were 30 people at this birthday dinner. I asked because the 4 of us knew each other, we didn't know anyone else. And I remember asking the waiter, can you do separate checks for us, please? And the waiter said, with such a large group, we cannot. And I said, can you do a check for just our table, the 4 of us separate? He said, yes, I can do that. So he did it. Our check arrived. We paid our portions. We each put in about $10 each of the 30 people, 10 or 20 bucks each, whatever, for the birthday person. I am not joking you. When the bill came, I forget how much the bill was. They were short about $300 on this bill. And my friends and I we're sitting there at the bar, just drinking our cocktails and letting the drama unfold. And they looked at me and said, thank you for asking for a separate check because we are not involved in this drama, which is why I did that, because we knew the birthday person. We didn't know the other people. And they didn't know each other as well. And so there was all this infighting about who ordered this, who ordered that, what happened. And we're like, we've all each put in about 10 or 20 bucks each, whatever it was. Like, we've covered the birthday person too, and it still wasn't enough. And I see this happen a lot of times at these birthday dinners. And I just thought it was interesting from a cultural lens. I've started doing that myself as well. I'll invite a few friends out. Let me cover dinner. It's my birthday. I want to do this. And yeah, and then it's just a little bit easier, but just wanted to share that.
Back to capitalism, right? Like It's this, like it does these things to us where we start to, that's how we judge fairness, right? Well, what did you order? How many drinks did you have? And it causes us.
You ate the egg roll.
That's right. I'm not paying for that. I specifically didn't order that. And it just gets crazy, right? And what about if we were, because by the way, Jefferson, I've had that experience happen too. That exact same thing where you have a large group, the check comes and you're like, well, I don't know who this is for because either a bunch of people didn't pay something or something's up. And then those people are out the door that time. So it's too late. But I think it's just a matter that, when we gather with people, what would the difference have been if it was like, how many people are there here? We're just going to divide the check by that and split it up evenly, right? That's more of a social capital approach. But capitalism would tell us, no, that's unfair. You can't do that. Spend half an hour arguing about it. That's the right way to do it.
Yeah. No, exactly. So I'm thinking we should probably wrap up a little bit. Anna-Liza, thank you very much. Is there anything you would like to leave with us for our audience in terms of, this whole concept? I mean, a few things I've learned today is, number 1, conversations are important and we need to have them. Number 2, we need to also get beyond this whole, fear of talking specifics around money and move towards a place of let's have an honest and open discussion with the people who we may be leaving wealth to. Ideally, let me rephrase that. Ideally, leaving wealth and not debt to, and the people who we may be working with who may be leaving us wealth or debt. And it sounds like that we need to start having more of these conversations just as human beings, as frankly, I would say be very specific here and say melanated communities, and I would be very specific here and say LGBTQ plus communities. Love when you brought in the component about women. I come from a very matriarchal family on both sides, and I've heard many discussions about women, and especially women as it relates to wealth. So these are just a few things I've been learning through this. So is there anything else you'd like to leave our audiences with? Anna-Liza.
Thank you for asking. Those are some fantastic takeaways. I definitely echo that. One thing I'd like to say is, and we haven't talked about this too much today, but thinking about the workplace context, right? So as an organizational justice consultant, I spend a lot of time, talking with leaders and organizations about how to make things more equitable. And when it comes to budgeting for equity, there's so much that goes into that, but money trauma doesn't get talked about. So I've got 2 invitations for, not challenges, to use colonial language, but invitations for our listeners today. One is, if you are in a management position I don't care what kind of organization it is, and you have staff that have some type of budgeting function, first, don't assume that they're coming into that job with life experience to do with budgeting. Don't assume that they're coming into that with full confidence about their budgeting ability. And don't assume that you will not have to train them to do something, right? So I would say just don't assume. And this is, again, as they say, putting the human back into human resources, right? Seeing what does this person actually need to do their job? You want to give them the tools to do the job? Maybe that has to do with budgeting, and maybe consider the intersectionality of the situation, right? What equity deserving community or communities might this person come from? And that's not for you to go and do a whole historical analysis. What it is for you to do is to come into that interaction with the person, knowing that this might be a thing. And then you sit back and you listen, right? And you see where that person's coming from and you act accordingly. The second invitation I have is just for all of us in any walk of life. I invite you to have one conversation with one person in your life about money. No, you don't have to go as far as I did and start talking dollars and cents and bring an Excel chart and, a financial management app. It could be as simple as, how are you feeling about your financial situation these days? It could be as simple as that. And I would say that the more general the question, the more welcoming and opening, the more you're going to get a response. And it's like a snowball. Once you start that conversation, you will see people, they relax a little bit, right? Their shoulders are going to go down. They get a bit of sense of relief because they're like, oh, damn, this person's actually talking about something that I've always wanted to talk about, but I didn't think I could. I wasn't sure this was a thing. And now this person's really modeled good behavior to me. So that's my invitation. Try it out and see what happens, and you might be surprised.
Thank you so much for those invitations. And thank you for that reframe, right? Instead of calling it a challenge, I love that you said, right, like, let's remove this colonial language. And I'm going to take that invitation. I'm going to, instead of leaning in with like, Dad, where's all your retirement documents? I'm going to ask, like, how are you feeling about your finances right now? I think that that's a great way to open it up. So thank you for the medicine. And thank you so much for being here on the show. It's been an honor to talk to you. And I can't wait to visit Canada so I can hang out with some good folks like y'all, get some good food, and maybe go do some dancing, which will be fun.
Thank you as well, Anna-Liza. I like that. Again, I like that reframing of invitation. That's another thing I've learned today as well. As I know, I'm on my own journey to decolonize my mind. And that story is for another episode. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Peace.